This video is to just show how to make a sized nut blank out of brass for MIDI Pro 2 guitar nut slot, which is here. So the first thing we're going to do is just cut this blank so that we've got an 8mm size. I'm going to cut it a little bit bigger because we're going to machine it down, and I'm going to cut it on the bandsaw. So I'm just going to make a sized line here as a reference, just in case the bandsaw cuts crooked, which they tend to do. So we're going to use this nut vise to clamp this and machine this flat with the disc sander. So normally I take a small file and just remove the burr from the edge. And I just clean up the brass on a piece of fine 3M pad. So here it is cleaned up. So zero out your calipers and you're going to want to measure exactly the width right at the nut slot. So here we've got 42.78. So now we're going to bring this down to 42.78 and we're going to want to make sure that this is square, which it is. And this edge is already clean. So this is the cut edge and I'm going to clean this one up while bringing it down. So we're now down to 43.16. So what I would do is put a little reference mark along here so that you can see how much you're taking off. And then just take off the last little bit. So there it is at 42.78. So the next thing we're going to do is prep the slot. So I just splay out these wires with this little flathead screwdriver like this. And take off this insulation. And you're going to use this little chisel to take out the just make sure the slot is clean. What you always want to make sure as well is that there's no raised part in the center here, because it will cause this connection, or this brass must make a really good connection on these two wires. So if there's any kind of a hump here, it's going to create a seesaw so that this doesn't press against these wires and it's going to mess up all the signals. So you want to really make sure that this is lower than the two of these, and if not, you can chisel out an extra little bit from the center and just make sure you don't slip over. I would flip the neck to the other side to make sure you don't go straight across and damage these wires. So it's no harm to have this ever so slightly lower. So we're going to want to fit our nut in. Now if this is loose, which it is, sometimes it's really tight, sometimes it's loose. If it's really tight, you've got to thickness this with a file, which is another job. But if it's loose, so here you can see it's nice and snug, but it's a little bit loose. So what we'll actually do is temporarily glue it in and knock it back out. But for now, we just want to mark the top contour. So basically, we want to make sure this is well seated in. We now measure up on the low E string side, 2.5mm, and put a little mark. So I've got 2.5 approximately with a fine tip pen. And then I come along, so this is like a tapered gauge. So you can see it's thicker on this side than this side, and it's especially for doing this top contour. So you want to make sure, I have a mark here, but this isn't even it's slanted down that way to allow for the contour on the back going into the headstock. So you slide this, you can loosen this underneath, slide this along until it kind of reaches the line, which is my 2.5 mil, and draw a nice line across the top. And here we go. You take this back out, and then we're now ready to machine the top off. So we're going to machine off the top contour. We put it into this vise here, and what we're going to do is, as opposed to normally doing it on the, when we did the other side, we did it on the disc sander, this one we're going to do with the belt sander, for the fact that it's going to leave nice straight lines for when we're doing our nut slots. So now we have the nice top contour, and we take a file and just knock off the burr off the edges. Flip it around. So I'm just going to clean up one of these to drop in some super glue in there. So what's super important here is to use the thick super glue, because if you use medium, and especially if you use thin, it can run into these wires and insulate them against this, which is disastrous for the MIDI performance, because everything, you know, the nut sets, the calibration, etc. So we always use thick super glue. And so this slot is a bit loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to glue it in and knock it back out and glue it back in again, because it will build up the super glue in that central area. So I just pop a bit of super glue onto this and rub it onto the, along here, and another little bit on the other side. And put it along here. And then you can just rub your finger along here in a straight line just to take off that bit of super glue. And set this guy down in. Okay, so I'm going to knock this back out, and I normally use this flathead and pop it back out, and then I'm going to actually glue it back in again afterwards. So again, we glue back in the nut with some thick super glue. And when I'm lining this up, so it's tighter going in this time, I normally line it up with a ruler or a straight edge along here, and then you want to make sure that it's really pressed down well. So I forgot to actually remove the super glue there. Normally I would use a bit of acetone, but that cleaned up okay there. So I have this straight edge along here, and you should find if you rub your nail along here, it's flush if you've done a good job earlier on. So this should be bang on flush on both sides. And then afterwards, we're not going to do it now, but later on we're going to trim off the wires with a sharp chisel.